Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome SUSE Senior Product Manager Joe Werner and SUSE Technology Specialist Don Vosburg.
Good morning. So I don't know if you know this guy, Arthur C. Clarke. He's most famous for his contributions to one of my most favorite science fiction movies, 2001: A Space Odyssey. So last year, for those of you who were here for the keynote, we brought Salt to space, and fortunately, it wasn't really an odyssey. This year, we want to pick some other motif from Arthur C. Clarke. So I'm Joe Werner, Senior Product Manager for Management at SUSE, and I've again brought Don with me from our US SE team, who is kind of the SUSE Manager and Salt magician. Yeah, that's kind of the motif for us. Let's try the first piece of magic.
If I wave this, will you go more toward the center of the stage?
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, so Arthur C. Clarke.
Guess not.
He framed that famous adage, the third law of Arthur C. Clarke: any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. For me, one of those magic moments with technology was not too recently when, for the first time in South Africa, I used an Uber car. And to give you some context, in South Africa, you really want to make sure that the driver that picks you up is the driver you want you to pick you up, you know? And Uber made sure that I knew the car was coming, I knew where I could expect it, I had the face of the driver, I had the license plate, and this was really feeling like magic. But we all know that this magic is technology. And behind the scenes, actually that is Vienna Opera House, behind the scenes of all those software applications, those apps that look so effortlessly, in many cases, there are hundreds of moving parts. And a lot of the guys in this room are helping with their work to keep the magic happen. We at SUSE are committed to help you with making this magic happen, help all those everyday magicians to do their jobs. At SUSE, we are committed to open source software because open source really helps us, stand on the shoulders of giants. These days, almost everyone in the internet industry and beyond the internet industry is committed to using open source. So we can stand on the shoulders of giants like Google, like Amazon, and surprisingly, Microsoft. Microsoft has been contributing a lot to open source recently and hired some really great talent. But also medium-sized companies and hundreds of thousands of individual contributors. I don't know if you've read about it, but just recently, Equity, a private investment firm from Sweden, has announced that they are sharing our passion about open source. So for the first time in 15 years or so, SUSE will again become a fully independent company. We will have funding by Equity to make our transition from being mostly a Linux company to being the open source company that brings open source to software-defined infrastructures. Well, one of the open source projects, of course, that we have been using to make the magic happen, or to stay in the previous picture, one of the giants we are standing on is Salt, of course. For SUSE, the story of using Salt started a couple of years ago, 3-4 years ago, in our SUSE Manager team. SUSE Manager is our tool for basically making this, what I'm calling the magic wheel, happen. So this is kind of inspired by ITIL, but I think it's a bit more agile than the typical ITIL process. In that inner circle of the magic wheel, we have all those lifecycle processes. And then there's kind of the control circle with health monitoring, compliance, and security. And as you sure know, because you are at a SALT conference, SALT can help you with all of those pieces. And increasingly, we are making use of SALT in SUSE Manager in all of those pieces, from provisioning to configuration management. And of course, because we have this always-on message bus with the event bus feeding us live information back from the systems and beacons and all those things, we can also use it on the monitoring security and compliance side.
But isn't SUSE Manager just spacewalk colored green?
Well, it started off that way, and it was really a porting of it where we mainly, made sure that all the trademarks are changed and so on. But these days, if you look under the hood, there's so much salt in it, it's not the same product anymore. And I'll come back to that later, because we've also changed the way we are looking at the upstream community for SUSE Manager. Let me just quickly run through a few things that we've added in the SUSE Manager 3.2 version that we released earlier this summer. And they are actually, it's all about SALT and somewhat related to SALT. Formulas with forms. We presented, I think, first time 2 years ago. We've massively improved them. So formulas with forms, you can look at it as a very easy way of creating web forms to manage your pillar data, to give admins a chance to just basically choose from a drop-down menu or fill in a few blanks and populate your systems with the right presets before you run your SALT states. Now this has been expanded so you can do really complex forms, like if you have to add users and all of the users, you have like 4 fields to fill in per user. You can basically have flexible forms where this whole section for a user, or let's look at the partition table or DNS, this can be replicated. Samba, yeah, and it can even be nested, so you can have arbitrarily complex forms if that's required. We have also finally come to the point where you can basically add your SALT states through the web. You can manage SALT states through the web, add files, and they are all versioned in the SUSE Manager database. It still, of course, works very well with a Git-based backend, but especially for smaller size deployments, customers like having everything in the UI from one place. Another thing that we've massively improved is Actionchains. Actionchains were added a couple of years ago to allow for short workflows, like you want to patch a box and then reboot it. Things that are done frequently. You can run this on just 1 box or 100 boxes. You can schedule it for a later time. And it's very easy to just add stuff to that chain. What it does with SALT is it allows you things like adding a patch management state that updates your SALT itself, restarts the minion, reboots the box after a kernel update, and the state will survive through that whole chain. So we have found a really clever way of making sure that when the machine comes back up, it will just resume where it stopped. With a normal SALT state, you can't do that because once the minion reboots or the minion, the daemon is restarted, of course, you will lose context. Image building. We had container image building in the last version 3.1. Now we have image building for virtual machine images and physical images that we deploy through Pixie magic. And we are combining that with a project we are calling SaltBoot. SaltBoot allows us to do the complete provisioning from Pixie boot to the final system and configuring the software all from SALT. So there's a RAM-based image that just has a SALT minion and everything that the SALT minion needs in it. This SALT minion connects to the SALT master, and basically we can start doing partitioning, downloading the actual image that should be deployed on the box, setting up the network, and then after rebooting and making sure that, of course, the minion's ID and key is also copied over to disk so that the minion is still the same personality, we can then go on with the second stage. We are also going to provide more and more content, templates that customers can use to set up things like our less for SAP solutions, SAP HANA databases, for example. HA clusters, that's a project that a colleague of us just has been working in the last couple of weeks on. And of course for the point of service deployments, which are sometimes thousands of locations, 30, 40,
with
50.
Limited bandwidth.
Yeah, limited bandwidth and a lot of complexity. Finally, virtual machine management. And again, we are using Salt under the hook. There's a colleague of us, Cedric, who's also at the conference, who has improved the libvirt support in Salt to make this happen, and he's constantly improving it. The idea here is to have a lightweight virtualization management framework that's of course not going to compete with the big ones like OpenStack, private cloud solutions, but it will do all the basics, and because it's based on Salt, we think it can also help with integrating with these other features like the image building into small
Take your image and actually deploy it.
Yeah, you can have CI all automated through Salt, where we trigger the image build, and when it's done, you know, just let Salt also deploy it, for example. Yeah, this could be really helpful. Salt is part of this bigger picture of how we envision the IT of the future, with two building blocks, basically. The software-defined infrastructure, of course. That's where SUSE started, you know, making sure that we have a solid operating system. And now we are going the next step up the ladder, because it's not just operating system, it's about software-defined storage with our Ceph project, software-defined Kubernetes cluster, virtual machine management with OpenStack, and so on. And of course, we are also doing that in the public clouds. And the second pillar geared towards the developer, and that's the application delivery platform. You may remember from yesterday's keynote, I think it was from the first data keynote, you know, this decision to make, oh, should we go with Kubernetes, should we go with Cloud Foundry? With SUSE, you can combine the best of both, because our Cloud Foundry distribution is the only one that's fully based on Kubernetes, and that's highly optimized. It needs much less resources than the virtual machine-based Cloud Foundry distributions. And of course, because it's based on Kubernetes, you can also run containers directly without the application delivery part if you want to. Salt is not only part of this picture in the SUSE Manager, in the management column, but under the hood, we are also using it for setting up our storage clusters, the Ceph part, setting up the Kubernetes clusters, and we are using Salt Cloud in our public cloud team that is working with the Amazons, the Microsoft Azure team, and so on, to deploy more complex workloads in those public cloud environments. Now, let me talk a bit about the relationship between SaltStack and SUSE. We've been working together on the open source project, on Salt Open, basically since we have embraced Salt. But SaltStack Enterprise and SUSE Manager are also a perfect team when it comes to managing Linux environments. Just to give you a few ideas here. SaltStack Enterprise adds...
Don't give away everything, because I want to show them.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so Don is going to do the demo, but I'll just quickly run through some of those points that you will see. So SaltStack Enterprise adds role-based access on the enterprise level to your Salt environment. It allows you to centralize reporting of all the events that happened. Of course, you have the multi-master scalability. You have an enterprise-wide pillar data management, enterprise-wide file system for your Salt states. And of course, it supports not just one platform, Linux, macOS, Windows, AIX, you name it. And soon, as we saw yesterday, there will be some really great SecOps solutions. Together with SUSE Manager, you have a really great lifecycle management solution for Linux, because we, as I just mentioned, we are adding topics that SaltStack Enterprise doesn't address: building OS images, provisioning those OS images with Salt and Pixie Boot, managing pillars from those formulas with forms, so you can customize for a group of machines or for an individual box, what the settings should be. Repository management, because if you look at many cases of configuration management, the one thing that a lot of people really don't take seriously enough is that your salt states are only as good as the software that they are using. So if you have vulnerable software in your software repositories, the salt states will not fix that automatically. You will have to make sure that you also manage those repos. And that's what SUSE Manager can do best. It's also, of course, part of that comprehensive software-defined infrastructure portfolio that you just saw on the other slide. So this is how the overall blueprint looks like. We have the SaltStack enterprise console. We have the enterprise API. The enterprise API connects to the SUSE Manager and other Salt Masters, of course. And both worlds can, of course, also work together using the same users from the same LDAP directories and connect to the same Git resources. So now let me hand over to Don for the demo.
And here we go.
Here we go.
Okay, so as you know, SUSE Manager is integrated with Salt in that it's both a Salt master and it uses the Salt API to do execution. So this is my SUSE Manager server. You can see I've got Salt Master running. But if I do the state show top, you can see that more is integrated into this pluggable top architecture than you might normally have in your Salt Master. But what value really does SUSE Manager add beyond just being a Salt Master? What are the things that it does uniquely that you might not be able to do with just a Salt Master? So here's my SUSE Manager server, and you can see I've got a bunch of different systems. I have SLES11, I have SLES15, I have Red Hat, and all of these are pointed at very specific base channels or repositories, so the content that I deliver is controlled very much by the SUSE Manager administrator. So I know exactly what patches I have available for my systems, and I'm able to do that. And then my minions actually roll up, in this case, to my SaltStack Enterprise server. And hopefully it will, because it's not working. So, okay, we'll try once more here. There we go. So you can see on here, I actually have more minions here than what appeared in my SUSE Manager server. This CentOS box is knocking at the door of my SUSE Manager master. Should I let him in? Well, all right, cool. You get a sticker for that. Okay, so I'm going to select this guy and go to the key management actions and accept the key here in SaltStack Enterprise. So these minions are actually registered to my SUSE Manager as the master, and I can have multiple SUSE Managers talking to my SaltStack Enterprise tool. And here I can see not just the actions that occur on from what I've delivered here in terms of job returns, but I can actually also see CLI jobs. So I see here, this is a CLI job, so this job was actually initiated by the SUSE Manager server. And when I look at my minions, this is really important. When I look at Linux, I get a nice summary view here of my systems, and I make sure that I have more SUSE than I have of Red Hat. That's super, super important. What? Okay. So on my SUSE Manager server, we've done a ton of things with Salt. And one of the things we mentioned with Joe earlier is that if you are familiar with Spacewalk, some of the actions might look the same, but in fact, they've been replaced with Salt things, including the configuration channels. So if I look at configuration in Salt, I have this configuration channel called MQ Tuneup. And in looking at this, I have both the SLS file and the actual file itself that I'm editing. So This is revision 2 of my Salt SLS file, and you can see it does several things. And then if I edit it, I can actually compare the file with early versions so I know what I've changed. And I changed where the source is coming from in this particular salt state. In addition, if I look at systems, I can see my formulas, and this is something Joe referenced earlier with formulas with forms. In a system itself, I get all the system details, and I look at formulas and see they're organized by nice categories. So I'm looking at my pillar data, essentially, and I can look up here at the individual ones and see what I control. So these are the Samba controls, and if I enable homes here, it appears here at the top in home directories, and I can change my options and save the formula, and it gets applied at the high state. So, Joe, back over to you.
Thank you, Don. So,
wait a minute, that one didn't work. How about this one? Woo, Harry Potter.
Okay. I guess I still need the clicker, right? Yeah. So, one thing we are really proud to announce is that SUSE now also has a dedicated Salt team. So we've been building up Salt knowledge in the SUSE Manager team for a while, but just recently we decided that there's so many projects in the SUSE that are using Salt, and we want to kind of centralize our contributions to Salt Open. So we are forming a dedicated team. And guess what? Of course, the guy leading that team is the guy who's the contributor of the year from the conference, Bo Mariniuk, who unfortunately, as we learned yesterday, cannot be with us because of visa issues. So it was just about 5 days or so. He has a visa now, but no flight, of course. Yeah. So another thing, so Don mentioned that SUSE Manager is basically based on the Spacewalk code base. Well, not anymore. A couple of months ago, we decided to create a new upstream project, and this was done together with our friends and competitors from Red Hat. We decided that it would be the best thing going forward to really start with a fresh project where we are taking the Salt code and the Spacewalk code into one new home, which is the Uyuni project. Uyuni, the name is from the largest salt flat in the world in Bolivia, because first of all, Uyuni is based on salt, lots of salt, and it gives you this vast plain where you can basically grow and expand into all directions. That's kind of the idea. To wrap up, I'll just mention a few of the projects our new Salt team at SUSE is working on and has been working on in the last couple of releases of Salt. First of all, one of the problems we have as a company that has to support projects for 10, sometimes 15 years, we need to make sure that tools like Salt SSH will still run from a pretty new Salt master on boxes that are still on Python 2.6 with a Salt 2018-11 or so. So we've done a lot of work to make sure that the Salt SSH knows, oh, I have to put in Python 2 code, not Python 3 code. That's what I can expect on the box and so on. We've also worked on a tool that is kind of modeled after our own support config tool that our supporters use to learn about problems that customers have. You know, it creates log files for certain applications, compiles it, and so on. We're doing that for Salt now, and there will be a presentation later in the afternoon where Pablo from our team shows you how the Salt support works. We have been working on Salt capabilities. This is still in RFC phase. These capabilities will again help with the cross-version compatibilities, because you can write states that explicitly ask, okay, is this capability available on my Salt minion? If yes, use it. Finally, of course, we all know that Salt is what you should be using for your configuration management, for your automation, but you may have an existing Ansible code that you want to reuse, that you want to integrate. And we don't think that Salt and Ansible are kind of playing in the same league, But there is Ansible code around, and with the Salt Ansible integration that we added to Salt, you will be able to run your Ansible code from Salt and automate your Ansible through Salt.
Don't we have a presentation on that today?
Again, that's also part of Pablo's presentation. Yeah, and to wrap it up, 2 more things that make it easier to work with Salt minions. First of all, the grains-based auto-accept whitelisting. That's a small but important improvement to the whitelisting. You will now be able to basically define any grain. Let's say you have a UUID on your clients, or you have a serial number that you know because your hardware inventory has it in the CMDB, but no one else can guess. So you can use that serial number through the grains mechanism when you are onboarding new minions, even before you have established trust and do auto accept in a secure way. Not so secure yet, but also already usable in trusted environments, trusted networks, master auto discovery, where minions can discover masters in the network and pick the right one. And finally, that's a bit forward-looking. We are working on a Terraform-like plan feature that makes it a bit easier to test drive your Salt states and get really good feedback on what is going to happen on the box if you're actually going to apply those changes. In general, Terraform is the one other tool that we are using a lot at SUSE, especially for internal purposes, and we want to make sure over time that Salt Cloud has all the features to replace that remaining non-Salt part of the stack. Yeah, there are 2 talks later. So Pablo at 1:45, and that's the one about Salt X or Ansible. And then there's another one from Patrick Swartz, who you might remember from last year's keynotes when he was still working for one of our joint customers. He's now with SUSE, about orchestrating bare metal with SaltStack and open source technologies. Well, to wrap up, I want you to remember that sometimes to do your daily magic, you don't really need pixie dust. A few grains of salt may do the job.
Do the magic. See ya.
Thank you.